Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we are going through the book of Job. This week, we're going to be in Job chapter 15. Now, the book of Job, it's kind of hard to study. It's long. It's nothing but a poetic book after chapter 2. But in the book of Job, we do get some very important lessons. Now, what are some of those lessons? Well, number one, even the righteous suffer. Job was a righteous man. In fact, if you go to Ezekiel 14:14, God calls out Job for how righteous he is. And he says, even if these three men, Noah, Job, and Daniel were in the land, their righteousness would only save themselves. So Job was a righteous man, but what does this tell us? Even the righteous suffer. Obedience to God is no guarantee to health and wealth. We learn that from the book of Job. We learn from the book of Job not to hold on too tightly to the things of this world. Job had great possessions. He was a rich man, but what happened to them all? They were all gone in an instant. The same thing can happen to us. So we learn, don't hold on too tightly to the things of this world. In fact, the Bible itself tells us, I believe it's in 2 Peter 3:10, that everything in this world, everything in the world will be dissolved one day. This earth will go away and we'll have a new heaven and a new earth. Just some other quick lessons we can take away from the book of Job. Number 3, Satan is on a leash. He can only do what God allows him. Why does God allow him to do so much? I don't know the answer to that. But Satan is on a leash. God tells him, you can only do this and no more. Now, there are other lessons. We'll get to them in a future date here, but barring time here, we'll keep going so we can get through our lessons. So today we're going to be in Job chapter 15. Now, this is kind of the start of the second round of speeches. All three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, have had a chance to speak, and Job has answered them. This is now round 2, where the three friends get to start talking again. But instead of actually helping Job, what are Job's three friends going to do? They're pretty much just going to rub salt in his wounds and make it completely worse. So let's just dig into this. We're in Job chapter 15. Let's get out our Bibles and let's follow along. Job chapter 15, verse 1. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, should a wise man answer with empty knowledge and fill himself with the east wind? Now, in Eliphaz's first round of speeches, he actually showed some patience and kindness towards Job. And it starts out in Job chapter 4, and he says, hey, Job, can I say something? Can I please attempt a word with you? Will you listen? So he actually did show some patience and kindness in the first round. In the second round of speeches, we actually find none of that. And in fact, Eliphaz has basically resorted to sarcasm now, which is probably not a wise thing to do. Now, one lesson we can take away from this right here is this. Nobody wins an argument. Philippians 2:14, Paul tells us to do all things without complaining and disputing. Now, has anybody ever read the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People? Besides, of course, the Bible, it should be one of those required readings. It's just very good into human psychology. But Dale Carnegie, in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, has an entire chapter devoted to this right here, to this, that nobody wins an argument. Why does he say that? This is right out of his book. He says 9 times out of 10, an argument ends with each person more convinced that they are correct. And think about this. Even if you win an argument, what have you accomplished? You've just made the other person feel inferior to you, and they will resent you for this. So what is the best way to win an argument? Just avoid it completely. Ben Franklin actually had this personal rule, and he said, never contradict anybody. That was his personal rule, how to get through life. And I think it's a great rule. So Eliphaz has to have the last word, can't just let sleeping dogs lie, and he has to tell Job how wrong he is here. So, verse 3, should he reason with unprofitable talk, or by speeches with which he can do no good? Yes, you cast off fear and restrain prayer before God. So what is Eliphaz telling Job right here? That you're restraining the prayers before God. You're hindering your prayers. You have no fear of God. He's saying these two things. Number one, you have no fear of God. Now, how Eliphaz knows this about Job? Of course, he doesn't know it about Job, but he's assuming something right here. But he's telling Job, you have no fear of God. Now, what does Proverbs 9:10 tells us? It says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Not a phobia type of fear, like you're scared of him, but in awe and due respect. In this verse here, verse 4, where Eliphaz is telling Job, you cast off fear. The NIV uses the words hinder devotion. The NLT says you have no reverence for him. So Eliphaz is telling Job, you have no fear of God. And he's also telling him this, that you restrain prayer before God. He's saying you're hindering your prayers. Now, how can we hinder our prayers before God? Well, David tells us in Psalm 66:18, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. In John chapter 9, it says, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of him and does his will, he hears him. So that's one way we can hinder our prayers before God, to hide sin in our hearts, to commit sin and then try to pray, to have unconfessed sin, I guess is the best way to put that. That's how we can hinder our prayers before God. Now, Charles Spurgeon actually had some other ways that he said we can hinder our prayers before God. Number one, he says if we do not pray often enough or regular enough, that will hinder our prayers before God. Number two, if we don't prepare our hearts, if we just go before the Lord with a flippant attitude, just, oh Lord, thank you for this day, thank you for everything, please be with all the people in the whole wide world, amen. Yeah, Charles Spurgeon said, don't go to the Lord with a flippant attitude, but prepare your heart. Number three, if we pray in a formal manner or a strict manner and we don't just pour our hearts out towards God, that's a way we can hinder our prayer. And number four, that Charles Spurgeon said as a way that we can hinder our prayers before God, is if we pray with little faith or with unbelief. Now, how in the world does Eliphaz know anything about Job's prayer life? Of course he doesn't, but he's assuming to know something here. So let's keep going here. Verse 5. For your iniquity teaches your mouth, and you choose the tongue of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, and not I. Yes, your own lips testify against you. Boy, with friends like this, who needs enemies? We've said that before, haven't we? Verse 7. Are you the first man who was born, or were you made before the hills? Well, now, what is Eliphaz doing? He's starting to resort to rhetorical questions to ask Job. What is a rhetorical question? It's a question that is very obvious and you know the answer to. You might say, does money grow on trees? Or how can you be so dumb? Those are rhetorical questions. Eliphaz is asking Job rhetorical questions here. The interesting thing, when God finally starts talking in Job chapter 38, God actually starts using rhetorical questions with Job. Where were you when I made the earth? When I told the sea, you can only go this far. So it's kind of interesting. But verse 7, this is Eliphaz talking to Job. Are you the first man who was born? Or were you made before the hills? Have you heard the counsel of God? Do you limit wisdom to yourself? This is Eliphaz trying to belittle Job right here. Verse 10, both the gray-haired and the aged are among us, much older than your father. I'm guessing Eliphaz is referring to himself right here. And he's saying, Job, I'm much older and I'm much wiser than you, and that you should listen to me. Verse 11, are the consolations of God too small for you, and the words spoken gently with you? Now we can see that Eliphaz has a very high opinion of himself. And why do we say that? Because he's referring to his own words as the consolations of God. Eliphaz thinks that the words out of his mouth are straight from God. And he's telling Job that right here. Verse 12. Why does your heart carry you away? And what do your eyes wink at? Verse 13, that you turn your spirit against God and let such words go out of your mouth. Now, Eliphaz is condemning Job for opening his mouth, but he forgets this one simple fact. A truly innocent person wants to defend themselves. If somebody is innocent, they want to be able to speak and say, hey, I'm innocent, and explain why. Do you ever watch any like the true crime shows on TV or like Dateline NBC? And what do you always think when somebody doesn't take the stand in their defense? You always think, oh, they're guilty, because if they were innocent, they would want to take the stand and defend themselves. Now, lawyers will actually tell you that taking the stand is not wise, because by taking the stand, you're waiving your right to be silent and you open yourself up to cross-examination. So a lot of times lawyers say, don't take the stand against yourself. But truly innocent people would want to take the stand and be able to say why they are innocent and explain themselves. So Eliphaz is condemning Job for opening his mouth, but he forgets that one simple fact. A truly innocent person will want to defend themselves. And that's what Job's doing here. Verse 14. What is man that he could be pure? And he who is born of a woman that he could be righteous. If God puts no trust in his saints, and the heavens are not pure in his sight, how much less man who is abominable and filthy, who drinks iniquity like water. Verse 17, I will tell you, hear me. What I have seen, I will declare. All right, here comes the wisdom of Eliphaz. He's saying, I've seen it all, and I know it all, and what I say is true, and you better listen. Verse 18, what wise men have told, not hiding anything received from their fathers, to whom alone the land was given and no alien passed among them. Now, Eliphaz is about to tell Job, this is what I know right here. And listen to this. The wicked man writhes with pain all of his days, and the number of years is hidden from the oppressor. Now, what does that word writhe mean? It means to continually twist, the squirming of the body. And Eliphaz is saying, the wicked man, he twists and turns with pains all his days. What do you think Job's doing right now? Job is covered with boils from head to toe, and he is in pain all the day. So, what is Eliphaz telling Job? The wicked man is in pain all the day. Hey, what are you, Job? You're in pain all the day. So, obviously, Eliphaz is talking to Job about his situation right here. Verse 21, dreadful sounds are in his ears. He's talking about what he believes the wicked man. In prosperity, the destroyer comes upon him. He does not believe that he will return from darkness, for the sword is waiting for him. He wanders about for bread, saying, where is it? He knows that a day of darkness is at hand. Now, this is something we haven't talked about yet, but we probably need to think about this. Where's Job getting all his sustenance now and his food? He surely can't work covered in boils, so Job has surely had to resort to either begging or resorted to the courtesy of his friends here to provide for him. And what's Eliphaz saying? The wicked man, he wanders about for bread, saying, where is it? Job, you're that man. This almost reminds you, doesn't it, of Nathan's parable when David sinned by committing adultery with Bathsheba and then having her husband Uriah killed. And then the prophet Nathan comes in and has that parable about the one little lamb and the guy with all the sheep. And then he just takes that one little lamb from that one person. And David's like, we got to kill that guy. And Nathan says, it was you, David. Eliphaz is basically using that form of parable by saying, it's you, Job. You are that man. Verse 24, trouble and anguish make him afraid. They overpower him like a king ready for battle. For he stretches out his hand against God and acts defiantly against the Almighty. Verse 26, running stubbornly against him with strong and bow's shield. Verse 27, now this is interesting right here. Remember, Eliphaz is still talking about the wicked man. Though he has covered his face with his fatness and made his waist heavy with fat. Now, back in these times, having excess body fat was actually a sign of wealth and prosperity. It meant that you didn't have to work all day to find your food. So that covering your face with fat, what Eliphaz is saying here, having excess body fat, it was a sign actually that you had plenty. So that's what Job says, like you were living a life in pleasure and comfort. Verse 28, he dwells in desolate cities, in houses which no one inhabits, which are destined to become ruins. Verse 29, he will not be rich, nor will his wealth continue, nor will his possessions overspread the earth. Now, Eliphaz is going right back to his theology that only the wicked suffer. But we know that this simply is not true. There are many wicked people that go through life apparently happy and successful, while there's many godly people that experience suffering and failure. The story of the rich man and Lazarus, I believe it's in Luke 16. The rich man, he fared scrumptiously every day and lived on the best delicacies. And what did Lazarus do? Sat outside, letting the dogs lick his sore and begged for food. But what happened when they died? The rich man, he went to Hades. But Lazarus, he went up and was in Abraham's bosom. So that tells us right there that just because somebody's suffering on this earth doesn't mean that God is judging them and that they were wicked, because Lazarus was the righteous man and the rich man was the wicked man. And they both got what was due to them. So Eliphaz is going right back to that theology, but we know that it simply isn't true. Verse 30, he will not depart from darkness, the flame will dry out his branches, and by the breath of his mouth he will go away. Let him not trust in futile things, deceiving himself, for futility will be his reward. It will be accomplished before his time, and his branch will not be green. Verse 33, He will shake off his unripe grape like a vine and cast off his blossom like an olive tree. Verse 34, for the company of hypocrites will be barren, and fire will consume the tents of bribery. What happened to all of Job's stuff? Fire consumed it, just like Eliphaz is saying right here. Verse 35, they conceive trouble and bring forth futility. Their womb prepares deceit. So Eliphaz just describes what he believes will happen to all evil people. And the fact that he is telling Job this is saying that, Job, you are such that man. But remember, God's own testimony about Job was that Job was an upright person. So Eliphaz is speaking contradictory to God right there. So we're done with chapter 15. Next week, Job is going to answer Eliphaz in chapter 16. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.